How do you interconnect all these systems? How do you automate that? How do you make that effective use of these space assets for national security, sustainability, and economic prosperity, right? And so that's really what we're focused on, is leveraging modern technology to just make the most effective use of space. There's direct application for space and what space can provide and its vantage point that we can use here on Earth to think about sustainability, but also think about economic growth. ChatGPT coming online was a big awakening for a lot of people. Even though a lot of industries have been using AI in different ways, what we've been doing was not originally really focused on techniques like reinforcement learning and decision making and how do you automate these things. Also, some pressure from China. Their output of papers and research has been astronomical. The government is realizing, well, they have some catching up to do.
Welcome to Forging the Future, and today I'm sitting down with Guy de Carufel, the CEO and founder of Cognitive Space. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm a little jealous. I mean, how do you actually found a space company? I mean, you just wake up one day thinking founding companies are hard enough, right? But reaching for the stars, it's hard, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there used to be an old joke that to start a space company, to be a millionaire as a space company, you had to be a billionaire to start with, right? But that has changed a lot, I'd say, over the past 10 years. And, I have a background in aerospace engineering, worked at NASA for a good while, also worked at a launch vehicle company in Austin, Texas, before starting this company almost 7 years now. I've had an entrepreneurial streak. I tried a web startup before that didn't work out. I failed miserably, but that got me
a lot of learning, I bet.
Oh yeah, for sure. What not to do and what business model makes no sense. But that helped me start this company. I had some savings from working as a consultant, and then that allowed me to hire my first engineers and get started.
Well, what particular problem sparked your epiphany that you needed to start Cognitive Space to solve?
So working at NASA, it's maybe there's some misconception that NASA is far advanced technology and all that, but they actually use pretty old technology generally.
When I was there, that was true. I mean, it was like all this space certified hardware, and it's like, wait, these are vector displays that are rattling around, and
right.
it's like. And even then, there was new stuff. So.
Well, yeah, and NASA in particular is pretty risk averse. So they like to use, technology that's been proven, that's flown in space, and all that. And so, it was a little frustrating working there just because of how slow things are moving. Like even cloud technology was like not even something they were doing. Like never mind AI or machine learning or anything like that. And there were a lot of processes and software. I was writing a lot of software for spacecrafts. I wrote software for the Orion spacecraft. The processes that went into that were very tedious. You changed one line or one config and you had to redo a whole testing suite of, 2-month-long testing campaign, which didn't make much sense to me given like where technology is today and looking at web stacks and looking at AI and machine learning. And so I figured, there's probably an opportunity here to modernize the space industry. And, I reached out to some friends in the commercial space and see how they're doing. And actually, even in the commercial space, a lot of people came out of NASA. And so they brought with them a lot of, the baggage that came with that or
bad practices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, using, decades old ways of doing things, which work for, one spacecraft, two spacecraft, and when you start to scale, it starts to break down, and you have to kind of rethink of how you're doing space systems. And I would say SpaceX did an amazing job at doing that. They kind of they made it a conscious decision for SpaceX not to hire space engineers because they wanted to bring in a new thinking in the industry. And now when they're doing when they're updating their software on their spacecraft, They're using methods of like what Android does and how to update millions of devices all at once and make sure that you have a fallback and all that. So SpaceX adopted technologies like that. So the industry, I'm just using that as an example, but the industry in general has to kind of rethink of how we do things, of how do we manage these satellites, and to be able to really move to the next level of thinking about not only a few hundreds but thousands or even tens or hundreds of thousands of satellites in space or ground assets, and all of that being connected. You need to have a very dynamic system, very autonomous, and you need to use modern technology, modern stacks, AI, modern DevOps systems, and all that the rest of the industry is using and adopting, but space has been slow to adopt.
And just curious, what programming language were you programming the Orion spacecraft in?
That was all, even C++ was a little, out there. There was all like C, with, very old school C and some Python and things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. When I was there was some mandate where NASA was requiring everyone to program in Ada, which is a little bit of an obscure programming language, but they liked the fact that it was like a 7-pass compiler and all this stuff. It was just
I had to write some Ada code for the space station a little bit, and I couldn't even find a book on how to write Ada. So thankfully, I didn't have to work on that. But yeah.
At least it's not COBOL. So your platform kind of takes the modern technologies that are available today and somehow applies them to space. I mean, how do you drag the space industry along to kind of modernize in this way?
Yeah, so I mean, we when we started the company 7 years ago, AI was still kind of a bit of a buzzword, and people didn't really believe in AI, especially not the government, right? So talking with the government, which is still by far the largest customer for space systems and space imagery and all that. If you would say AI to say a colonel or a general, they would end the meeting, right? They're like, I'm not interested, right? And then fast forward, 3 years, 4 years later, and now if you don't bring in an AI component to it, they're not interested, right? It has completely flipped 180. And because they realize that, they have some major catching up to do, and the rest of the world is smartening up on using these systems. And so, the government is looking for that, for that innovative system. These companies like what we're doing that can that can push the envelope and kind of bring modern technology to the stack to automate systems. In our case, it's really focused on decision making. So how do you automate scheduling for these assets? How do you automate link management, collection planning? When do you take imagery with these satellites? And then, going one step further, and then how do you orchestrate across multiple systems, multiple constellations, multiple third-party providers to, orchestrate all that intelligently.
So what do you think was the impetus for that flip? You said everything flipped like 3 years ago. I mean, what really drove that?
So I would say, things like, ChatGPT coming online was a big awakening for a lot of people. It's like, oh my God, you can do so much with, like, AI is magical now, right? And so then I would say that was a big moment. Even though, a lot of industries and have been using AI in different ways. What we've been doing was not originally really focused on natural language processing, LLMs, and things like that. We were more focused on techniques like reinforcement learning and decision making, and how do you automate these things. Now, you can pair that with LLMs to make that even more powerful, and that's some of the things we're looking at. But I would say that was a big moment. Also, some pressure from China that has really been, their output of papers and research has been astronomical, like 10 times what the U.S. is producing. And, from a policy perspective and the government is realizing, well, they have some catching up to do, right? And so it came from the top down. It says, like, we have to get smart on that. And then gradually the messaging has changed in that direction.
I've heard that China's even landed on, like, the dark side of the moon. It's doing all kinds of experiments, but you don't hear about any of that in the U.S. press,
Right.
really.
Right.
I mean, although to be honest, it doesn't seem like anyone's that interested even in what SpaceX is doing, right? I mean, you do hear about the rocket launches and whenever there's a failure, but the fact that we had astronauts up there doing spacewalks and being further from the Earth than they've been in 50 years, you'd think that that would be big news.
Right, or a recent commercial lander that went on the moon, right from Intuitive Machines here in Houston. So that was big
It's a
news in
big
the space
deal.
industry, but even outside of space, it's still pretty niche. But I would say space in general, for China in particular, is a very important national pride right now. They're investing a lot, and they're really moving fast at at the same speed that the U.S. was back in the Apollo days. And honestly, right now we're playing catch up a little bit, and they're deploying, from a national standpoint, tens of satellites every other week.
Well, how do we catch up?
Well, I mean, there's multiple ways. One is from obviously the quality of your spacecrafts, and the U.S. produces a lot of good spacecrafts, both commercially and on the government side. And there's a move towards moving away from the large billion-dollar program towards more agile, nimble systems that are smaller satellites, but maybe have like 1 or 2 payloads rather than 10. But then you can deploy them a lot faster, and then you can think about mass production and things like that. So those are ways to scale. And then you have to think about the infrastructure. How do you manage these systems effectively? And then how do you control and make use of them effectively? And that's where you want to use AI and automation and really robust infrastructure.
At Softtech, we don't just follow the trends, we set them. As the founder and CEO, I've built a team that excels in delivering cutting-edge solutions in software, hardware, and IoT. From concept to completion, we're the partner that turns your tech dreams into reality. Softtech, where innovation starts.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that we actually landed on the moon with the power of a early TI calculator,
Right.
essentially, right?
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy. And then there's been this huge gap until recently with Intuitive Machines. But, and I also like your point about basically being more rapid and using smaller payloads and smaller devices. I mean, essentially that's their strategy for Mars, right? Let's just get a rover built and get it over there and get it on the ground. I'm curious why we haven't targeted the moon more than we have, for kind of like the stepping off point for learning how to do stuff in harsh environments, right? It's a lot closer, and it seems to me like the iterative loop would be a lot shorter than trying to find, not only the distance to Mars, but like what I just saw Elon saying recently, that there's a window, right, where we can actually launch and go there. And there's like a 2-year window, and to come back and forth, and it's actually possible because Mars gets much farther away, partly because of the way the orbits are and everything, right? Why aren't we iterating, more on the moon?
Yeah, and there is. I mean, I think both on the government side and commercial is starting to pay more attention to the moon, and there could actually be some economic benefits of doing that, mining or energy source, or even as a stepping point to go to Mars long term. But I would say on the government side, there's been a lot of policy changes. You change, the administration changes, and then all of a sudden they want to put their mark on it, and then it's now it's the moon, now it's Mars, now it's the moon, and so that has slowed things down considerably from a government standpoint. But now I think NASA has been investing heavily in supporting commercial programs to go back to the moon, establish a base, and then do some real development there. So that is pretty exciting.
Yeah, when I was there at IBM during the space shuttle days, I believe IBM had won the contract to do at least some major part of the space station. And then, like you said, the presidents changed, and then the program was canceled. Right?
Yeah.
And so the companies are putting all this time, money, and effort into winning these deals, and then they get axed.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people don't know that the space budget is just a small fraction of the U.S. budget, right? I mean, it's very small, but we should have owned the moon. We were there 50 years ago, right? I mean, we should be so much further along than everybody else.
Yeah,
But
and we are losing the lead on that to some degree. I mean, you mentioned China landed, so did India. They also landed a rover, and then Japan. So it's it's not just national pride. There's political reasons for doing that, it is it is an important vantage point, or important strategic potential position to be long term.
so, do you have to get certified to be a space startup? And any advice that you would give to someone who wants to start a space company?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not for the faint of heart. Starting a company in space is difficult, mainly because lead times are long, and you have to have a very, like, I would say 3-4 years ago you could come up with some technology that says, like, oh, I have this great tech and it's going to be better than anyone else to do that, and that could be enough to get you funded and get you started. But now I'd say that the market has matured to a point where, especially from the venture capitalist side of things, there's like, great that you've got a tech, that you've built a prototype. That's great. Well, what's the market? Like, how are you going to turn that into a viable business that's going to scale at a venture scale, right? And that's a hard question to answer in the space industry, mainly because there's a buildup and there's an expectation for what the space market could be, but we've been waiting for that market for a while, right? And it's the reality is government is still by far the largest buyer and customer of space imagery and of space in general. And so if you're not involved with government or government use, either national or international, you're going to struggle, right? And going after commercial, there's a lot of let's say disappointment, especially from the investment side of, like, well, we've been promised all of this growth, and the commercial side hasn't happened yet. I do think there is massive growth potential, but it's going to take time, and there's a lot of things that have to fall into place before that happens. And so I'd say one of the challenges in starting a space startup is that it takes a long time, and it's just long lead times, which doesn't always line up with the expectations from a growth perspective for VCs.
So those VCs are private funding. You're not getting government grants and government funding.
Yeah. So if you can go the route of a government grant and get a bootstrap your company, do that. That's a great way of starting, and that's actually how we got started. We won contracts with the government. We won several contracts with the Air Force, and then that really got us started, and that showed some some traction. Which with that we were then able to raise some money, and then accelerate and kind of try going a little in front and developing new technology, building a product, and then winning more contracts, and then kind of building that way.
Do the VCs want you to show how you can have an impact down here as part of the technology, or is it just space related? Because there are a lot of space tech that can be applied down on
That's
Earth,
right. That's actually always a selling point, is if you can apply your technology not just in space but here for other verticals. That's always a selling point.
Is it because of the TAM, the total addressable market for space? You need to factor in what you can sell down on Earth.
Right. That's right. So like the market, the market potential here on Earth is generally greater and more tangible and easier to grasp.
A lot of people don't understand that there is a lot of technology that has been invented for space that has benefited people here. You always hear the argument, why are we investing in space? We have people starving to death here and everything. Why are we spending all this money? And by the way, it's a fraction of like the defense budget, right?
Right.
But there's a lot of technology that has come and has made a real difference, because there are environments here that could benefit from the type of tech that you need to create for space, right?
Right, and especially space station is a very complex system that has to be self-sustaining, right? And thinking about like recycling of urine into drinking water, and it's a very self-contained system where it has to be effective, it has to be efficient, and so I think a lot of lessons learned from that can be applied to sustainability and agriculture and things like that. And if you take that further, like how would you establish a colony on Mars? You're going to need to have those technologies, right? There's the argument that said, like, why, like you said, like, why invest in space when you have all these problems on Earth? Space actually helps us here on Earth in many, many different ways, not just from developing technology, but also directly. Obviously, GPS is kind of the age-old example, but communications now you can have comms in a remote area because of satellite connectivity. You have satellites that take imagery that can tell you, what's the soil moisture level in a certain area, that can really help you with agriculture so that the food supply can be improved. Tracking, illegal fishing, right? And so it can help on a political standpoint. It can help on, mining, oil and gas, detecting methane gas detection for climate change. And so there's direct application for space and what space can provide, and its vantage point that we can use here on Earth to think about sustainability, but also think about economic growth and political disputes. So it has a major impact here on Earth.
Well, if I'm a space startup, how do I get clients? Are you running Google AdWords, or how do you find both government clients and commercial clients?
Yeah, it is a very I would say it's a tight network, tight community, and it's really about building that network and having. I mean, if you have that network to start with, if you have good connections, that always helps. Or working with a consultant that has that network that can make some introductions. But it's all about personal relationships. That's really how you build a space startup.
Which is actually true for a lot of businesses, right? But
it is, but it's particularly true in the space industry, where you can't really do like mass marketing, automation, and things like that. Maybe you can get there one day, but like to start, you really have to just build those personal relationships, go to conferences, and just ask for referrals, and keep an eye on the news and who's doing what, and just reaching out those people.
How did you specifically get that first client?
So I was going to a lot of conferences, a lot of them that made no sense to go to, but I was just networking. And
why do you say that made no sense?
Well, I didn't know which conferences was the good ones, with the bad ones, or
you're hanging out at Space Center Houston or something.
Yeah, I mean, I came from a technical background, and BD didn't come naturally to me necessarily, business development, and it took me some time to kind of get in the groove and figuring out, like, how do you talk to people? How do you introduce yourself? How do you pitch your idea and understand what will resonate with these people? How do you listen effectively? Active listening and putting forward the right value prop that whoever you're talking to will listen and hear what you're talking about and be interested in a follow-up conversation, right? And not try to necessarily, come in and sell something up front. It's all about building that relationship and then turning that into something long-term. And like I said, working in the space industry takes a long time. You have to build these relationships, and, that eventually can turn into something. But these are not generally like what we're doing. We're selling enterprise software, which it's lead times of half a year to build up that relationship, and then that can turn into a large contract. But you have to work your way to there, right?
So did you, in the beginning, when you're trying to look for those first early, I guess the government was one of your first clients,
it
right?
was, yeah.
And did you use some of those online tools to see like what RFPs were out there, and then you like make an RFP proposal, and then you won some of those, and that got you some early traction?
Yeah, so we got lucky. The Air Force in particular had a new program called, they were leaning in heavily on the SBIR program. SBIR, the Small Business Innovative Research Grants. Mm-hmm. Air Force created their own management of that called AFWorks, and then they opened a program called Open Topics, and you could just pitch your idea, and if it made sense within the mandate of the Air Force. They would invite you and then to submit a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And so that was a new program when I got started with the company. And so our timing was just right on that front. We were able to win several phase 1, 2, 3. And that's really how we got started. But
how big of contracts were those?
It's on the
10,000,
order
100,000?
Well, phase 1s are very small. It's like 50,000, and then phase 2s were on the order of $1.5 million to $2 million.
A lot of people don't know. I think that the government specifically does target a lot of startup work or small business work, and a lot of large enterprises then partner with the smaller companies because they know they need to satisfy that startup requirement. Have you done anything like that where you're partnering with a larger business?
Yeah, we've had conversations with several, like the traditional primes, and we've had a few contracts with them. So far, we've worked primarily directly with government as our direct customer, but we have had partnerships with some companies like that, especially when what we offer is a component to an overall system rather than being able to offer the full system, because that's when you want to talk to like a large prime that's an integrator of multiple systems, and they have sort of the infrastructure and then the relationship, and then they have the long-term contracts, the $100 million contracts with the government. And so they could bring you in and doing that. So yeah, we've had those conversations. So far we've built engagement with 7 different agencies to date. So we've been pretty fortunate about that.
Did you have to hire someone specifically to do some of those government applications, or did you just like roll up your sleeves and do it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I started the company as in finding those first customers, and then we did bring some business development, over the years, changing staff like that. So yes, we did bring in talent in helping us with business development. We did use outside consultants to help us with that. But a lot of the relationship and moving towards how do you align that with the vision of the product and where you want to take the company. I'm heavily involved with a lot of that, and the founder of a space company, or I would say probably in any deep tech company, has to be very involved with that in the early days of really shaping what that engagement is and hearing what the customer wants. Because oftentimes if you hire someone, they may not have that full picture, that full vision, and so it can be hard for someone else to come in and try to sell something if it's still being formed as far as like how does all these pieces fit together.
Well, maybe what are some projects you have your eyes on that are coming up in the space industry?
Yeah, I mean, so there's we're involved a lot on the government side, on the defense aspect and intelligence, and so we've been working with defense and intelligence company, government organizations, but also work with NOAA on a civil side. And we're looking to work more on the commercial side and how we bring, how do we open up the access to space to more the broader industry, and without neglecting the government, because that is an important customer. But we want to grow the aperture there and continue supporting the government, in their efforts to make better use of space, looking at what they call proliferated space, which is, how do you make use of all of these assets? How do you connect all these satellites? They're doing laser comm now between satellites, which is sort of a new technology. The Space Development Agency is a particular agency that's really pushing the envelope. They're deploying hundreds of satellites to do what they call mesh network routing, and then collecting with sensors to do missile defense and remote sensing and things like that.
Don't we need someone to start sending up satellites to clean up all the space garbage up there? I don't know how anybody launches anything up through Starlink and all this stuff. I guess they're at different altitudes, but there's a lot of stuff floating up there that is just getting crowded.
It is a problem. It is a concern. Space is big, and so even if you have thousands of debris or millions of small pieces of debris, there's still a lot of open space, and we track, the government tracks these objects in space, and so you can track those, you can predict where they're going to be, and you can through that make sure that you're not going to collide with any debris or existing satellites and things like that. But it is becoming a problem, and that's a whole other that's an area called a space domain awareness or space situational awareness. There's a lot of companies that are focused primarily on that, on understanding where these objects are. How do you do avoid collision avoidance and all that, so there's quite a few organizations, companies that are focused exclusively on that problem.
Why are we letting the space station just burn up? I mean, it's going to burn up.
Yeah.
In the next year or two, right? They're just going to let it deorbit or something. I mean,
I think they commissioned, I want to say, SpaceX to deorbit the space station fairly soon. I mean, it's lived past its lifetime.
It's old, right? I guess.
It's very old now,
and they're just concerned that it's just going to be some kind of disaster if they don't. Are they going to replace it or not?
So at this point, there's no government programs to replace it. The general thinking is that commercial will sort of take over that responsibility or that domain, and NASA in particular is more focused on the moon and putting a station around the moon.
So maybe private business will have a space station that you can take Blue Origin up to or SpaceX to and kind of hang out for the weekend or something like that.
Well, it is moving towards more of a commercial, like a tourist or maybe even manufacturing. So there's certain things where you can only manufacture in zero gravity. And so there is some applications that are companies that are looking specifically on doing that. One in Houston called Axiom that's building their own commercial ground their own space station. And there's several other companies trying to do that.
Okay, that's super interesting. I'm sure I could talk more about this, but how are you forging the future in space and beyond?
So we're really focused on how do we make effective use of space, right? Sending up new satellites is not really going to do us any good if we can't use them effectively. And having all these pieces that don't talk to each other and are not connected to the overall industry, the overall economy or systems. How do you interconnect all these systems? How do you automate that? How do you make that effective use of these space assets for national security, sustainability, and economic prosperity, right? And so that's really what we're focused on is leveraging modern technology to just make the most effective use of space.
And that's what Cognitive does?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Well, I have some space-related stocks for you, so I don't know if you need any. But
I will. Excellent.
It's rockets.
Thank you. That's great.
And thanks for coming on the show. And I'm excited to see what all these companies are going to create in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the commercialization of space and really unleashing the creativity of what startups can do.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear a lot more about space in everyday lives, and I can't wait to see growing systems in space on the moon, Mars, and the windfall that it brings to here on Earth.
Absolutely, go space.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.